Well, hello. Welcome to my lair. I hope everybody's having a frightfully good time tonight. In most of the world, tonight is All Hallows Eve. But here in Rwanda, Halloween is banned. Excuse me. Now, this doesn't stop people from throwing parties, mostly because newcomers to the country don't know about the ban. And Halloween is sort of one of those festivities like Valentine's Day or Christmas that is kind of hard to suppress. Any excuse to throw on a costume, gather together and eat candy is bound to attract an audience. But let's take a little look at exactly what happened and why it's such a controversial festival. It all began back in 2013, a fitting number indeed, when the then Minister of Sport and Culture, Proteus Matali, issued an announcement banning all public and private Halloween parties. Now, you might jump to the logical conclusion that most people did, that in a country that experienced a genocide less than 20 years previously, throwing a drinking party dressed as a skeleton would be a little bit vulgar. When you've stood in a room full of limed bodies at Marambe, listened to the stories of survivors, or seen row upon row of real human skulls at one of the country's many memorial sites, you no longer feel the need to invent imaginary horrors. If the ban had been framed in that context, I think most people would have understood. But that isn't what the objection was. Here's a rough translation of the ministerial order. The Minister of Sport and Culture informs all people, be they individuals, restaurants, bars, hotels, and all others who have organised an event that remembers the dead called Halloween Party, that they should stop these events because they are against Rwandan culture, and it is clear that no permission was given in advance by the council for these activities. The Minister of Sport and Culture encourages Rwandans to continue preserving and appreciating our Rwandan culture. The way it was worded raised a few eyebrows. Some people were mostly outraged at the idea that the ministry would spend so much time banning Halloween, but so little time addressing the issue of Miss Rwanda, which had been criticised by many people for sexualising women's bodies. And many people criticised Minispoc for its slightly xenophobic leanings. One person posed the very fair question as to whether or not Rwandan culture is actually clearly defined in the constitution. And a few others did agree with the ministry's thinking on this point, echoing the sentiment that Halloween is an imported holiday and hoping that it never becomes part of the standard calendar. And someone else made the very fair point that it should probably be illegal to wear gorilla costumes at Kwitazina. Kwitazina is the annual baby gorilla naming festival, and there were quite a few interesting articles as well. This article talks about the over-regulation of private life and also addresses the issue of trauma. It suggests that culture cannot be defined by government, but that it grows and evolves on its own. But it also seems to suggest that there's some hidden imperialist agenda to Halloween. And this is a very interesting article, which discusses the impact of Halloween on African culture in general. It swings broadly between people who see Halloween as aligned, at least in part, with ancient Rwandan traditions of ancestor veneration, and others expressing some extremely xenophobic sentiment. Rwanda only became Christian around 100 years ago, when the first missionaries arrived. But the traditional Rwandan belief in a supreme power, often called Imana, was very well aligned to Christianity, and so traditional beliefs were very easily absorbed into this new religion. And it is quite hard today as an outsider to find somebody who is willing to talk openly about traditional beliefs in Rwanda. But in the same vein, reading through a lot of these articles, it becomes clear that many Rwandans have a skewed idea of what Halloween originally represented. One thing that sits particularly heavy with me is this idea that Halloween is some sort of debauched, immoral festival. Right, let's do this. Hello. So, I wanted to have a little bit of a chat about a certain little something that was said in one of those articles, which was, Rwandans commemorate their dead in a sombre mood, unlike Halloween celebrations, which are rocked by immoral acts. Now, the reason I wanted to wade in on this is because I grew up pagan or heathen in the UK. Although the UK today is, I think, technically an atheist country in terms of numbers, there are also many Christians, there are many Muslims, many Buddhists, and many pagans. The 2011 census, I think, reckoned that there were about 75,000 pagans in the UK. But Ronald Hutton, who is one of our leading pagan academics, places that at around 250,000 or above. And I'd probably go with his estimate. Today, I'm not. Today, I am remarkably unreligious. I don't really care for religion very much. I'd class myself as an atheist or a humanist. I think it's difficult when you grow up a certain way, thinking certain things, to let go of those things entirely when they've been such an integral part of you. I think you find this for people who leave Christianity, people who leave Islam, people who leave any religion. It's very difficult to let go of everything when it was such a formative part of your growing years. And I think part of it is that it's almost harder to leave a community more than it is to leave the beliefs behind. But anyway, it's a complicated and ongoing, lifelong discussion. But I wanted to just talk about it in relation to Halloween because as a few people did point out in the Twitter comments, Halloween, it is technically, it's a Christian invention. The Christians went for Halloween in a big way. And as with Christmas, it was appropriated from other traditions. So Yule, the solstice, the longest night of the year. And Halloween we celebrate it as Samhain in the pagan community. It's spelt Samhain, but you say it's Samhain. And it's Celtic for summer's end, and it was the end of the harvest. It was the time by which you got all of your crops in. So it begins at Lunasar, which is another Celtic festival in August, when you begin the harvest. And then by Samhain, you're supposed to have finished bringing in all of the crops, and then the year dies, ready to be reborn at Imbolc the following year. Now, what I just find interesting is this part: Rwandans commemorate their dead in a sombre mood, unlike Halloween. Now, Halloween is the appropriation. That's what Christianity made of the original Samhain. But within the pagan community, Samhain is still the commemoration of the dead, and it is a sombre event. There's a group of paganism called Druids, and they're very, very known for summer solstice, which is the longest day of the year, when they gather at Stonehenge. And you often see all of these photographs of them gathered at Stonehenge during the summer solstice. What you don't tend to see is the gathering at winter solstice or around Samhain. So sometimes there's a gathering at winter solstice, sometimes gathering at Samhain. We tend to go to remote areas, quiet areas, and Halloween, 31st of October, is the pagan New Year. It's a very quiet festival. There are certain festivals throughout the year, so there are 4 festivals or 8 festivals, depending on which pagan following you subscribe to. So the biggest one is probably Beltane, which is May Day, which is the festival of fertility, where, yes, we do erect giant maypoles and we dance around it with ribbons, and we are basically, it's phallic worship. You know, which is nothing new. I mean, if you know anything about Roman paganism, you know that Fascinum is the flying penis, which is worshipped. So, you know, in the UK, we have our traditions as well. And it's a good and wholesome and vibrant celebration of life. It's very traditional, you know, with the community that I know and the people that I spent my time with, that you would stay up all night drinking and socialising, and then around 4 o'clock in the morning, you go to the North Sea, which is off the coast of Scotland, off the coast of Fife in Scotland, and the North Sea is bloody brassic. It's incredibly cold, and you strip off your clothes and you run into the sea, and you've never felt more alive in your life. You're literally floating there, looking up at the sky, looking up the sun just breaking over the North Sea, freezing cold, and then you all go home, have breakfast, and you sleep for the rest of the day. So that's how we celebrate Beltane. You know, it's a celebration of feeling alive. And Samhain is the opposite end of the year. So if you look at the year as a circle, Samhain is at the other end of that, Halloween. And Halloween is traditionally, yes, it's New Year, it's the death of the old year, it's the beginning of the new year, but it's also a time to remember your dead. And that is, for us, as with Rwandans, a very somber occasion. And what you tend to do is we drink a lot of mead. So mead is basically honey ale, and you drink it from long cow horns, which again, you find a lot of cow horns in Rwanda, same thing. But you drink it from cow horns, and you generally go around the circle and you say the names of anybody who died during that year, and you tell people the best memory that you have of those people. So it's a chance to share the memories that you have. So for us, New Year is not like the Christian New Year. The Christian New Year is, yay, that's the party. For us, that's May. But for pagans, it's traditionally Samhain, Halloween is a very somber affair, and it's a commemoration of the dead. Now, that's not to say that's how you should commemorate the dead, because there's the Mexican Festival of the Dead. So Dia de los Muertos, or the Day of the Dead, which is celebrated around the same time as Halloween, also includes costume parades, parties, and people leaving offerings at the graves of their loved ones. Celebrations of the dead have often conflicted with the Church's sense of what is moral and proper. In her Memoirs of a Mortician, Caitlin Doherty mentioned that in France, the Council of Rouen in 1231 banned dancing in the cemetery or in the church under pain of excommunication. To require such a forceful ban, it must have been a popular pastime. The cemetery was the venue where the living and the dead mingled in social harmony. Now, even though I subscribe to a slightly more, I guess, modern pagan approach to Samhain as being quite a sombre affair, I still like Halloween. I still like the dressing up. I still like the crazy costumes and the sort of, the spookiness of it. The whole point behind that, which is very pagan again, is the jack-o'-lanterns. We used to make them from turnips in the UK because orange pumpkins, that's more of an American thing that we've now adopted. We didn't have those, so we made them out of turnips. But the jack-o'-lantern is the idea behind Samhain is that it's the night when the crossing point between the living and the dead is at its thinnest. It's the night when we believe ghosts come back, ancestors come back, and walk the earth. So if you're going to see a ghost, you're most likely to see it on Samhain. But the idea behind that is that if scary things are out there in the night, then we need to make more noise. We need to be more raucous. We need to be more scary to scare away those spirits, to scare away that scariness. So you might look at a jack-o'-lantern and think, oh, that's really scary. Oh, but it's there to scare away the bad things. It's the good scary scaring away the bad scary. And this, you see this all over the world. So one of the oldest New Year's celebrations is Nowruz, which is an Iranian New Year. It happens at the vernal equinox, so the spring equinox. So this is where the day starts to go from short to longer, and the days are growing longer, and this is when life is coming back into the earth. And at Nowruz, they count 13 days from the spring equinox, and then they have the day of chaos. I believe you pronounce it be-dar, which is probably a terrible butchery of the language. But at be-dar, you have the day of chaos when on the 13th day, all of these things can go wrong. All of the bad luck can come and it can get hold of you, and it can really mess up your year if you get caught by the bad luck. And so what they do is they have this crazy night. So it's the day between years. So one year is ending, the next one is starting, and it is a day in between the 2 years. So it doesn't belong to either year, and it's a day of chaos. be-dar, and they have fire jumping, they have festivals very much like Beltane. And the idea on that day is that to scare away the chaos, you have to be more chaotic than the chaos. And so what they do is everybody goes around lying to each other, telling fibs, telling jokes, trying to get people to believe things that aren't true, and smacking pots and making lots of noise. Now, you might recognize this idea of going around telling lies because be-dar kind of falls on the same day as April Fool's Day. That's where we get April Fools from. It's the 13th day after the new year of Nowruz, which is basically a day of chaos. And this again, it translates into Christianity, because if you go to any of the big cathedrals, the big churches, especially in England or Europe, you see gargoyles. Now, come on, have you ever seen a gargoyle? This is a Christian church, and they create the most ugly, horrific monsters on the side of the church, again, to frighten away evil spirits, the badness. The idea is that if you want to get rid of badness, you've got to be badder. And that's where kind of the frivolity comes from. That's where the fun of it comes from, is you're not dressing up to scare people or to do horrible things. It's laughing in the face of danger. That's what Halloween is a celebration of. That's what be-dar is a celebration of. That's what gargoyles do. It's laughing in the face of danger and saying, come on then, let's see what you've got. And so, you know, I think this whole thing about, what is it? Halloween celebrations which are rocked by immoral acts. No, you've completely misunderstood what it's about at that point. And if anybody should be angry about it, it should be the pagans who had their celebrations misappropriated. But we, you know, generally speaking, polytheistic religions don't get too annoyed about spin-off traditions, because like we just get involved in everything really, just because it's fun. Now, I think the difficulty comes around to Rwanda, where there's a lot of nuance. As I said at the beginning of this video, when you have seen true horror and have lived through that, have been traumatized by that, then there are exceedingly good reasons why you would never even want to joke about that. And I think the cultural conversation that we're probably having in Rwanda at the moment is the fact that there is now a whole generation of young Rwandans. Anybody under the age of 27 didn't live it. And they might have heard the stories from their parents, like, you know, growing up, I heard stories about war from my grandparents. You know, that was a real thing. that happened to them, but it didn't happen to me. And whereas I can kind of listen to the stories and try to empathize, I didn't live it. And I think that's what you're finding a lot in Rwanda. Is it's a very, very young population. Every year, more and more people are coming to the country from countries all over the world and all over Africa. And they want to party and they want to, you know, get involved in these celebrations, which are harmless fun to young people who didn't live through that, but are traumatic and triggering for people who did. And I think it's very difficult to know how to balance that. You know, I haven't got an answer for it. But I think it's an internal conversation that has to go on. Yeah, that's about all I've got to say about that. So I just wanted to share a bit about what actually Samhain and Halloween mean to me, coming from that culture, the foreign culture. And, you know, and to acknowledge the fact that it is really complicated in Rwanda. So, you know, it's interesting. So that's a little insight to why Halloween is banned in Rwanda and why it is not banned in many other countries. But who is to say whether it should be allowed here or not? Certainly not me. This is an ongoing cultural conversation. But I would love to hear your thoughts and opinions, so do drop them in the comments below. And quickly, before the zombies arrive.